The rain was coming down in sheets the night I found out. Not a gentle, cleansing rain, but the kind that feels like the sky itself is weeping. John, maybe 47, was coming home late from a conference in Chicago. I worked as a software engineer. Sarah, my wife of 20 years, was supposed to be at her sister's, Emily. It was Emily's birthday, or so I thought. As I pulled into the driveway of our house in a quiet suburb of Denver, everything seemed normal. The porch light was on, casting a warm glow. I unlocked the front door, expecting silence, maybe the faint hum of the refrigerator. Instead, I heard music, soft, sensual jazz, and then a sound that ripped through me like a shard of ice. A moan, not a sound of pain but of pleasure. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stood frozen in the entryway, my briefcase heavy in my hand. I wanted to believe I was mistaken, that my ears were playing tricks on me. But the sounds grew louder, more insistent, leaving no room for doubt. I followed the music, my feet moving as if in a dream, or rather a nightmare. It led me to our bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, and the scene that unfolded before me is forever etched in my memory. Sarah, 45, was in our bed, naked, tangled in the arms of another man. Not just any man. David, our neighbor. A guy I'd shared beers with, helped with his lawn, considered a friend. Time seemed to stop. The blood drained from my face. The briefcase slipped from my grasp and landed on the floor with a thud, a sound that seemed deafening in the otherwise quiet house. Sarah gasped, her eyes widening in horror as she saw me. David, startled, scrambled off the bed, his face a mask of shame and panic. "John, it's not what you think," Sarah cried, reaching for the bedsheets to cover herself. Her words were like a dagger twisting in my gut. How could she even say that? What else could it possibly be? "Get out." I roared, my voice trembling with rage and disbelief. I pointed at David, who was fumbling for his clothes. "Get the hell out of my house." David didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his pants and shirt and fled, his eyes fixed on the floor. I watched him go, my fists clenched, every muscle in my body screaming for violence, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by shock. When he was gone, I turned back to Sarah. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, tears streaming down her face. "Please, John, let me explain," she begged. "Explain," I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Explain what? Explain how you could betray me like this. Explain how you could sleep with our neighbor in our bed. It just happened," she sobbed. "I don't know how, we were just talking and then—" Her voice trailed off. "Talking?" I scoffed. "Is that what you call it, talking?" I couldn't bear to look at her any longer. I turned and walked out of the room, my heart shattering into a million pieces. I went downstairs and poured myself a glass of whiskey neat. I downed it in one gulp, but it did nothing to ease the pain. The pain was too deep, too profound. I sat there for hours, staring into the darkness, trying to make sense of what had happened. Sarah came downstairs several times, pleading with me to talk to her, to listen to her, but I couldn't. I was too numb, too angry, too hurt. Finally, as dawn began to break, I spoke. "I want you out," I said, my voice flat and cold. "I want you out of this house, out of my life." Sarah's face crumpled. "John, please don't do this," she cried. "I'm so sorry, I made a mistake. Can't we work through this?" "No," I said firmly. "We can't, I can't, I'm done." Next few weeks were a blur. Sarah moved out, taking only her clothes and personal belongings. I hired a lawyer and filed for divorce. The process was messy and painful. Sarah fought me every step of the way, trying to convince me to give her another chance. But I refused. The trust was gone, irrevocably broken. I learned later that the affair had been going on for months. Months of lies, deceit, and betrayal. Months of Sarah sneaking around behind my back, laughing at me, making me a fool. The anger I felt was all-consuming. I wanted to lash out, to hurt her the way she had hurt me. But I knew that wouldn't solve anything. So I channeled my energy into something else, rebuilding my life. I threw myself into my work, spending long hours at the office. I started exercising, going to the gym every day. I reconnected with old friends, people I had neglected during my marriage. Slowly, gradually, I began to heal, but the scars remained. The betrayal had changed me, hardened me. I found it difficult to trust anyone, especially women. I became cynical and guarded, afraid of being hurt again. One evening, about 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I received a phone call. It was Emily, Sarah's sister. Her voice was trembling. "John, I need to talk to you," she said. "It's about Sarah. We met at a coffee shop near my house." Emily looked pale and drawn. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "I know what Sarah did was wrong," she said, "but I need you to understand why." I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "Oh, really? Enlighten me." Emily hesitated, then continued. "Sarah wasn't happy in the marriage for a long time," she said. "She felt neglected, unappreciated. You were always working, always traveling. She felt like she was living a lonely life." I stared at her in disbelief. "That's bullshit," I said. "I worked hard to provide for her, to give her everything she wanted. How can she say she was neglected?" "I'm not saying it's your fault," Emily said quickly. "But that's how she felt. And David, he paid attention to her. He made her feel wanted, desirable." "That justifies cheating?" I asked, my voice rising. "That justifies betraying me, lying to me, destroying our marriage?" "No, it doesn't," Emily said softly. "But I wanted you to understand. And there's something else you need to know." She paused, then took another deep breath. "Sarah's pregnant," she said, "and David's not the father." I stared at her, my mind reeling. "What?" I stammered. Who is the father?" Emily looked down at her hands, her voice barely a whisper. It's your brother, Thomas." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. My brother. My own brother had slept with my wife. The betrayal was so profound, so shocking, that I couldn't even process it. That's impossible," I said, shaking my head in disbelief. "It's true," Emily said. "It happened a few months ago, before Sarah started seeing David. She was drunk at a family gathering, and well, one thing led to another." I sat there in stunned silence, trying to absorb the information. My wife had cheated on me with my neighbor and my brother. My life had become a twisted soap opera. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked Emily, finally finding my voice. "Because you deserve to know the truth," she said. "And because Sarah's a mess. She doesn't know what to do. She's afraid of what Thomas will say, what everyone will say." I didn't say anything. I stood up and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving Emily sitting there alone. I needed to be alone to process what I had just learned. I drove home, my mind racing. I couldn't believe what had happened. My wife, my brother, my neighbor, it was all too much to comprehend. I went inside and poured myself another glass of whiskey. I sat there for hours, drinking and thinking, trying to make sense of the madness. As the night wore on, a plan began to form in my mind. A plan for revenge. I knew I couldn't let Sarah and Thomas get away with what they had done. They had destroyed my life, and they needed to pay the price. The next morning, I called Thomas. I told him I needed to talk to him, that it was important. He agreed to meet me at a bar near his house. When I arrived, Thomas was already there, sitting at a table, nursing a beer. He looked nervous. "What's up, John?" he asked, his voice strained. "I know about Sarah," I said, cutting to the chase. "I know about the baby." Thomas's face paled. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "Don't bother denying it," I said. "I know everything." Thomas hung his head, ashamed. "I'm sorry, John," he said. "I never meant for this to happen." "Sorry," I sneered. "Is that all you have to say? You slept with my wife, you got her pregnant, and all you can say is sorry." "I was drunk," Thomas said weakly. "It was a mistake." "Mistake," I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "A mistake that's going to ruin my life, your life, Sarah's life." I leaned closer to him, my eyes blazing with anger. "I'm going to make you pay for this, Thomas," I said. "I'm going to make you both pay." I stood up and walked out of the bar, leaving Thomas sitting there, trembling with fear. My first act of revenge was to tell Thomas's wife, Olivia, about the affair. I knew it would devastate her, but she deserved to know the truth. Olivia was heartbroken. She confronted Thomas, and he admitted everything. She kicked him out of the house and filed for divorce. Next, I went to Sarah. I told her that I knew Thomas was the father of her baby, and that I had told Olivia. She was furious. "How could you do that?" she screamed. "You've ruined everything. You ruined everything when you cheated on me," I said coldly. "Now you're going to have to live with the consequences." I then contacted David, the neighbor. I didn't confront him directly. Instead, I anonymously sent his wife, Jessica, photos I had secretly taken of him and Sarah months earlier. The photos were indisputable proof of their affair. Jessica was devastated. She threw David out of the house and filed for divorce. David lost his job and was forced to move out of the neighborhood, ostracized and alone. With each act of revenge, I felt a sense of satisfaction, a sense of justice. But it didn't bring me happiness. It didn't fill the void in my heart. The pain was still there, lurking beneath the surface. Sarah gave birth to a baby girl. She named her Hope. Thomas refused to acknowledge the child, denying that he was the father. Sarah was left to raise the baby alone, struggling to make ends meet. I watched from afar, feeling a mixture of pity and contempt. Sarah had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. Years passed. I moved on with my life, eventually finding love again with a kind and compassionate woman named Ava. We married and had 2 children of our own. I was finally happy, truly happy. One day, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Sarah. "John," she wrote, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. I've made so many mistakes in my life and I regret them all. I ruined our marriage, I hurt you deeply, and I'm so sorry. I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me." Read the letter, feeling a strange mix of emotions, pity, sadness, and a flicker of forgiveness. I never replied to the letter. I didn't know what to say, but I realized that I had already forgiven her in a way. I had moved on with my life and I was happy. That was the best revenge of all. The story doesn't end there. A few years later, I received another phone call from Emily. Her voice was somber. "John, I have some bad news," she said. "Sarah's gone." "Gone?" I asked, confused. "What do you mean gone?" "She died," Emily said. "She had a car accident. She didn't make it." I was stunned. Sarah was dead. The woman who had once been my wife, my lover, my best friend, was gone. I attended the funeral, feeling a strange sense of detachment. I saw Thomas there, looking grief-stricken. Olivia was not present. After the service, I approached Emily. "How's Hope?" I asked. "She's doing okay," Emily said. "She's with me now. She's a sweet girl." I hesitated, then made a decision. "I'd like to see her," I said. "If that's okay," Emily smiled. "I think Sarah would have wanted that," she said. I visited Hope at Emily's house. She was a beautiful little girl with Sarah's eyes and my brother's smile. I felt an instant connection to her. I started visiting Hope regularly, taking her to the park, reading her stories, teaching her to ride a bike. I became a father figure to her, a role that Thomas had abandoned. Over time, I grew to love Hope as if she were my own daughter. She brought joy and meaning to my life, filling the void that Sarah had left behind. And so the story comes full circle. A story of betrayal, revenge, and ultimately forgiveness. A story of how even the deepest wounds can heal, and how even the most broken hearts can find love again. A story of how life can surprise you in the most unexpected ways. I never forgot what Sarah did, but I learned to let go of the anger and resentment. I realized that holding onto those negative emotions was only hurting me. By forgiving Sarah, I freed myself from the past and allowed myself to embrace the future. And in the end, that's all that matters. Moving on, finding happiness and making the most of the life you have. Even after the worst betrayals, life goes on. You can choose to be bitter and consumed by anger, or you can choose to heal and find happiness again. The choice is yours. Years later, sitting on my porch watching my children play, I often reflect on the events that shaped my life. The betrayal, the revenge, the forgiveness, the love. It's all part of my story, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Because it taught me the most important lesson of all, that even in the darkest of times there is always hope, and that love in its many forms can conquer all. And so, my friend, if you ever find yourself facing betrayal and heartbreak, remember my story. Remember that you are not alone. Remember that you are strong. And remember that you can overcome anything as long as you never give up hope.